On the final night of April 1943, HMS Seraph surfaced off Spain carrying an officer who had never lived. Moonless water rolled beyond the casing, while Lieutenant Bill Jewell checked the Spanish coastline, hidden inside darkness ahead of them silently. Below deck, crewmen had guarded a metal canister labeled optical instruments, joking uneasily about their silent, refrigerated passenger below. Inside lay the body of a young Welshman dressed as Major William Martin of the Royal Marines for a secret mission. A briefcase chained to his wrist contained letters describing Allied plans important enough to redirect armies across distant Mediterranean shores. If Spain surrendered those papers to German intelligence, Adolf Hitler would receive the secret Britain desperately wanted him to steal. The corpse was not hiding the invasion plan. It was carrying a carefully engineered lie directly toward enemy hands. Yet the operation depended upon currents, paperwork, medical judgment, diplomatic restraint, and strangers behaving exactly as predicted under wartime pressure. One failed detail could expose Sicily, warn its defenders, and turn an amphibious landing into catastrophe before dawn ever arrived. Jewell had commanded clandestine voyages before. This assignment demanded a different discipline: release the passenger, leave no witness, disappear. The central question was larger than one submarine mission. How could a dead stranger make experienced commanders move living divisions? To understand why Germany might believe him, the story must return to an island everyone already expected Britain to attack. By early 1943, Axis armies had lost North Africa, and Allied attention naturally crossed the narrow water toward Sicily. The island occupied the Mediterranean center, threatening shipping routes and offering airfields for operations against Italy and southern Europe beyond. Capture it, and Allied convoys could move more freely while pressure mounted on Benito Mussolini's increasingly brittle regime at home. Geography made the logic plain to Allied planners. Unfortunately, the same map lay open before German and Italian military staffs. Sicily therefore offered both the next strategic step and the worst possible place to achieve surprise against prepared defenders ashore. The defenders did not need certainty about Allied intentions. They needed enough warning to reinforce beaches, airfields, roads, and coastal batteries. An amphibious assault concentrated men, landing craft, fuel, and schedules into a narrow window that could not easily be changed. Once convoy routes revealed the destination, every delay offshore favored defenders already occupying high ground and prepared positions along the coast. Allied superiority in ships and aircraft mattered enormously, but it could not erase surf, congestion, weather, or organized coastal resistance. The problem was not simply landing on Sicily, it was preventing the Axis from meeting that landing fully prepared and reinforced. Bombing alone could not disguise the island's importance, and silence could appear suspicious when preparations spread across several nearby countries. Britain needed German analysts to see authentic evidence, connect it with existing fears, and choose another conclusion for themselves first. A lie announced too loudly would invite examination. A secret discovered through apparent accident might earn something stronger: German trust. In London, the task reached a cramped wartime office where maps, memoranda, and human habits became instruments of strategic warfare. Naval Intelligence Officer Ewan Montague joined Charles Cholmondeley, an imaginative Royal Air Force officer assigned to Britain's secret deception machinery. Their work belonged within a wider system coordinating false signals, troop impressions, diplomatic hints, and misleading military preparations abroad. The planners could not merely invent an alternative target. They had to create evidence capable of surviving methodical hostile scrutiny. An old idea offered a starting point: let enemy agents find documents on a courier, apparently lost while traveling overseas. War had produced genuine accidents in which aircraft vanished, bodies washed ashore, and official papers traveled with officers on missions. That familiarity made the concept plausible, but precedent also made security services alert to planted evidence and suspiciously convenient discoveries. The false courier therefore needed more than a uniform and orders. He needed the accumulated friction of an ordinary human life. His pockets would need receipts, keys, cigarettes, tickets, and private complications, each answering questions nobody could predict in advance. His official papers must seem important without seeming planted, specific enough to guide Germany, yet indirect enough to persuade experienced analysts. Even the method of discovery mattered. A neutral country had to recover him while German contacts remained close enough to interfere. Spain was officially outside the war, but its institutions contained sympathies, relationships, and rivalries that intelligence planners could quietly exploit. Huelva offered currents that might carry a body ashore, and officials believed vulnerable to German intelligence access operating nearby there. But currents did not obey filing cabinets, and officials were not pieces on a board. Every working assumption introduced another risk. Before Britain could misdirect an army, Montagu and Cholmondeley first had to construct one convincing man from almost nothing at all. The first obstacle was brutally practical. The scheme required a body whose condition could support a believable aircraft accident at sea. Wartime Britain had many unidentified dead, yet intelligence could not simply take one without considering families, records, and eventual discovery. They consulted Bentley Purchas, the London coroner, whose profession placed death, documentation, and difficult discretion within the same daily routine. He explained that drowning usually left medical signs, making a body merely dropped into water vulnerable to careful examination afterward. A supposed crash at sea offered flexibility, because exposure and delayed recovery could blur the precise cause of death considerably. Still, the chosen body had to resemble a serving officer, travel secretly, and remain preserved until Sarif reached Spain. Purchas identified a recently deceased young man without relatives, expected to demand immediate answers or interrupt the operation's timetable. Consent was not obtained from the dead man, a fact that later triumph could never make ethically uncomplicated or morally clean. For the planners, urgency supplied the argument. One anonymous death might help prevent thousands during the approaching invasion of Sicily. The body was stored cold while Montagu and Cholmondeley began transforming a legal absence into a socially recognizable officer. Their invention received a plain name, William Martin, common enough to resist easy checking across military records during wartime confusion. His rank would be major, senior enough to carry sensitive correspondence, but ordinary enough to travel without an escort. The Royal Marines provided useful plausibility, connecting him naturally with naval movement, amphibious planning, and combined operations work overseas. Yet military identity depended on details that institutions routinely generated: identification cards, pay records, passes, and official photographs too. A genuine officer stood in for the camera because the dead man's appearance could not provide a convincing portrait. The resulting face had to resemble the body closely enough that any comparison would end with acceptance, not alarm. Uniform posed another problem. Cloth fresh from stores would suggest costume, while clothing too worn might contradict Martin's supposed status. His battle dress was used, adjusted, and supplied with the insignia expected from a Royal Marines major traveling abroad. Even underwear mattered, because labels, quality, and wear could expose a manufactured identity during an unexpectedly thorough inspection later. Shoes had to show ordinary use. Pockets had to contain what a hurried officer would forget to remove naturally. The planners called these items wallet litter, although their purpose was closer to archaeology performed before a life existed. Each fragment implied yesterday: a bus ticket, a theater stub, matches, loose change, keys, and routine receipts from London. Together, they suggested movement through London, small purchases, private habits, and the careless accumulation no official file could imitate. But perfection would appear artificial. A real man's pockets contained inconsistencies, expired papers, and errands left incomplete that week. Martin therefore needed problems as much as credentials, because inconvenience makes an invented person feel anchored in time and place. One overdue bank notice implied poor financial discipline, an imperfection unlikely to be included by unimaginative forgers creating propaganda. A receipt for an engagement ring opened a second dimension. Major Martin was not only employed, but emotionally expected home. The woman waiting for him was invented as Pam, given a photograph and letters with intimate ordinary warmth throughout them. Her picture made him legible instantly, while her handwriting supplied a voice no military stamp could manufacture alone credibly. The romance also increased the operation's moral discomfort, borrowing recognizable affection to animate someone denied his own recorded story. Montagu carried Martin's imagined habits beyond paperwork, asking what such an officer bought, smoked, attended, and postponed in London. This was not decoration. German analysts would judge the secret letters partly through the credibility surrounding their supposed bearer. If Martin seemed false, Greece and Sardinia would seem false beside him, regardless of seals or distinguished signatures alone. If he seemed human, however, enemy suspicion might become curiosity, then professional confidence, and finally military action against distant shores. Identity solved only half the problem. His body still needed to tell the same story as his possessions together. The planners chose an aircraft journey because aircrew accidents could explain immersion, missing companions, and documents carried personally aboard. A life jacket would reinforce the crash narrative, yet its handling, fit, and condition also had to withstand examination. Timing remained unforgiving. Preservation had to last through transport and submarine passage without leaving signs that contradicted the fiction. Meanwhile, the operational letters were still unwritten, and their wording would decide whether this elaborate man actually mattered strategically. Before Major Martin could travel, Britain had to place a dangerous falsehood inside correspondence that sounded almost casually genuine. The deception could not rely on forged operational orders because genuine commanders rarely entrusted complete invasion plans to a single traveling courier. Instead, General Archibald Nye wrote privately to General Harold Alexander, allowing strategic implications to emerge through familiar professional correspondence. The letter suggested Greece as the major objective, while treating Sardinia as another operation within the broader Mediterranean design. Sicily appeared only through misdirection, as though discussion around it concerned camouflage rather than the actual forthcoming Allied assault. Enemy analysts would not receive a convenient map with arrows. They would infer intent from exchanges between senior officers. This distinction mattered because intercepted private correspondence seemed less theatrical than intelligence, arriving as an explicit battlefield revelation alone. Another letter from Lord Louis Mountbatten introduced Martin as a trusted officer, carrying expertise toward North Africa on assignment. Its tone mixed official purpose with personal familiarity, helping the case resemble routine wartime traffic rather than planted evidence. An informal aside supplied texture but also risk, since humor that looked engineered could betray the entire package immediately. The planners revised every phrase against rank, personality, and current operations because authenticity depended upon institutional voice as much as ink. Real signatures, stationery, folds, and handling supported the illusion while the messages remained indirect enough to invite careful interpretation. Yet, credible wording meant nothing if seawater destroyed it or Spanish officials returned the case unopened to Britain promptly. The briefcase was attached by a chain, suggesting Martin had protected it during flight without guaranteeing permanent control afterward. The case needed to separate from him during examination. Otherwise, Spain might bury Britain's strategic bait beside its courier. Huelva remained attractive because German intelligence maintained useful connections there, while local authorities officially still preserved plausible Spanish independence. Britain could not hand Germans the papers directly. The neutral bureaucracy had to deliver access first without appearing controlled. Hydrographic specialists studied currents, winds, and tides, seeking a release point from which Martin might plausibly reach shore naturally. The water offered no certainty. A body could drift away, arrive too late, or be recovered by inconvenient witnesses. A local fisherman offered the likely discovery pattern, an ordinary civilian encounter followed by police, medical, and consular procedures. Those procedures created danger. A rigorous autopsy might identify contradictions between the supposed crash, drowning, and actual death circumstances. Bentley Purchase believed decomposition and local medical limits could preserve ambiguity, especially if British officials quietly discouraged prolonged examination. That required British diplomats to appear anxious enough to value the papers, but not so anxious that Spain grew suspicious. Requests for return had to sound routine and urgent while avoiding pressure that might close German access completely prematurely. The Germans were not passive recipients. Their analysts compared captured material against deployments, previous reporting, and strategic logic carefully. Therefore, Martin could not operate alone. His story needed support from the wider Allied deception system already surrounding Greece. Operation Barclay created impressions of forces, preparations, and intentions aimed toward the Balkans, giving Martin's letters a credible background. False radio traffic, notional formations, reconnaissance activity, and political expectations formed separate clues capable of quietly reinforcing one another. Sardinia also made military sense. Its position threatened Western routes, and Axis planners already recognized its vulnerability to attack. Greece touched Hitler's long-standing concern for the Balkans, where Romanian oil and regional stability carried enormous strategic weight too. The deception did not manufacture fear from emptiness. It offered documentary confirmation for dangers German leaders already considered plausible. A successful strategic lie rarely replaces the enemy's worldview. It enters that worldview and quietly rearranges priorities from within. Back in London, Martin's personal chronology was checked against theater dates, banking notices, travel receipts, and military administration records. His identification card carried signs of use, including a replacement explanation, because suspiciously immaculate credentials could appear newly fabricated. The surrogate photograph remained imperfect, but identity documents in wartime were often imperfect, damaged, or checked under pressure anyway. Tailors and officers inspected Martin's clothing, ensuring badges, fabric wear, and personal effects properly agreed with his invented rank. A specially prepared canister packed with dry ice would preserve the body during transport while concealing its true contents. Its label warned handlers that optical instruments required care, and ordinary instruction masking the most unusual cargo in Britain. Departure schedules had to match Saraf's patrol because delay threatened both preservation and the operational calendar for Sicily itself. By late April, the invented major possessed orders, memories, debts, affection, and a mission, though never consciousness of his own. Only the planners knew that beneath William Martin's complete biography lay another man's interrupted life and an unanswered silence. On April 19th, the canister left London by road, beginning a journey whose paperwork described instruments rather than a preserved body. Montagu and Cholmondeley accompanied it to Scotland, protecting both the secret and the narrow timetable imposed by refrigeration during wartime transport. At Greenock, HMS Saraf received the cylinder under strict orders, while most submariners remained unaware of its actual contents. Lieutenant Jewell alone learned the mission fully, then selected several officers who would assist when the submarine reached Huelva. Saraf sailed south through waters where enemy patrols, mechanical trouble, or an inspection could expose an operation without conventional defenses. The canister occupied precious space inside an already cramped vessel, surrounded by pipes, bunks, machinery, and men keeping watch. Crewmen repeated nicknames for their mysterious passenger, but discipline prevented curiosity from becoming questions Jewell could not safely answer. Secrecy protected more than mincemeat. Saraf was an operational submarine entering a sea crowded with Axis aircraft and ships. Each submerged day consumed batteries, air, attention, and time, while the false major waited inside his refrigerated steel compartment. On April 30th, Saraf approached the chosen waters before dawn, navigating near a neutral coastline where discovery remained possible. Jewell surfaced offshore and ordered the submarine cleared, leaving only the small group authorized to understand the strange ceremony ahead. They opened the canister, prepared Martin for the water, secured his life jacket, and chained the briefcase to his wrist. The documents remained inside their case, protected sufficiently for recovery, yet vulnerable enough to examination by careful intelligence technicians later. Jewell read Psalm 39, giving the invented officer a brief naval service before committing him to the Atlantic. The body entered the dark water, and the current began carrying Britain's manufactured secret toward a shore beyond British control. Saraf withdrew after the crew sank the empty canister, removing evidence that might contradict the aircraft accident story near shore. Once submerged, Jewell transmitted a coded report confirming completion, while success itself remained unknowable somewhere behind the submarine offshore. The mission had crossed its decisive boundary. British planning could influence events now only through reactions performed by others. Later that morning, fisherman José Antonio Rey Maria found the body near Huelva and brought local authorities into the deception. To him, Martin was no intelligence device, only a dead foreign serviceman recovered where currents delivered him from offshore. Police recorded the discovery, collected the briefcase and personal effects, then quickly moved the case into Spain's administrative machinery. Every transfer created opportunity and danger, because German access required delay, while British credibility required visible concern for recovery. The British vice-consul, Francis Hazelden, identified the supposed officer and began managing a situation his government had secretly created. He needed local officials to accept an accidental death, limit medical scrutiny, and retain the documents long enough for interception. Spanish doctor Eduardo del Torno examined Martin, working under conditions that favored a straightforward conclusion rather than exhaustive forensic reconstruction. The examination attributed death to immersion following an aircraft accident, the exact narrative British planners needed Spain to accept. Crucially, no extended autopsy dismantled the story, and decomposition made precise challenges less attractive to local officials there anyway. Martin's clothing, identification, letters from Pam, tickets, keys, and receipts supported one another beneath this limited scrutiny convincingly enough. His ordinary imperfections performed their intended task, turning the body from a suspicious delivery mechanism into someone recently alive. Yet the papers that mattered remained sealed inside the briefcase, formally subject to neutral Spain's obligations toward wartime Britain. Hazelden requested their return, performing concern without revealing that immediate compliance would destroy Mincemeat's strategic purpose entirely at once. London reinforced that performance through diplomatic messages, hoping Spanish officials would read urgency while still allowing covert examination elsewhere. Too little pressure would imply worthless documents. Too much could force Spain to protect them before German technicians gained access. Meanwhile, Martin was buried with military observance in Huelva, beneath a name created only weeks earlier in London offices. The grave gave the fiction public permanence, with Major William Martin's invented name fixed above a genuine man's remains. Spanish naval authorities sent the briefcase toward Madrid, widening the chain of custody and increasing opportunities for German access. German intelligence contacts had cultivated relationships inside Franco's Spain, where official neutrality coexisted with strong Axis sympathies among officials. Their challenge was opening protected correspondence, copying its contents, and returning everything without marks obvious to British examiners later. For Mincemeat, those marks were essential, because Britain needed evidence of German examination before trusting any apparent strategic reaction. As Martin's case moved inland, London could neither observe the opening nor know whether Spain would permit it at all. In Madrid, the briefcase entered a bureaucratic contest between Spanish officials protecting neutrality and agents determined to inspect British secrets. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris's Abwehr network possessed contacts capable of obtaining the case, but access still required cooperation inside Spain's government. Cooperative Spanish intelligence officers permitted German specialists to examine the correspondence before Spain eventually returned the briefcase to British custody. Technicians could not simply break official seals, because damaged envelopes would reveal interference and warn Britain that Spain had violated neutrality. Instead, they manipulated the folded letters through narrow openings using slender probes, preserving the outward appearance of untouched official correspondence. German agents photographed the contents, transmitted copies for analysis, and restored the originals to their envelopes before British recovery efforts succeeded. What appeared in those photographs was persuasive, precisely because it did not read like a formal statement of Allied strategy. The letters assumed shared knowledge, mentioned objectives indirectly, and wrapped military meaning inside recognizable exchanges between senior commanders abroad. Greece emerged as the principal eastern objective, while Sardinia appeared threatened elsewhere, forcing Axis planners to consider several defensive demands. Sicily's role as supposed cover completed the inversion, making genuine Allied preparations around the island look like camouflage for another attack. That interpretation did not demand German credulity. It rewarded German analysts for recognizing patterns they already believed strategically sound. Hitler considered the Balkans vulnerable, especially because Romanian oil and southeastern Europe remained essential to the Axis war effort. Sardinia also offered a credible Western target, positioned where Allied air and naval power could threaten Italian communications directly. The documents therefore confirmed existing anxieties, instead of asking Germany to abandon everything its own intelligence had previously reported. Operation Barclay's false signals and notional formations supplied supporting noise, allowing Martin's letters to function as powerful privileged confirmation. To German readers, the courier had not delivered an isolated clue. He had seemingly authenticated an entire developing picture. London, however, possessed none of this certainty, while Spain retained the briefcase and German command discussed its copied contents. The planners could only watch diplomatic channels, intercepted communications, and the physical condition of whatever Spain eventually returned home. Delay created two opposite fears. Perhaps nobody had opened the documents, or perhaps someone had recognized the entire fabrication. British diplomats continued requesting Martin's property with measured concern, maintaining the performance while avoiding an accusation against Spanish authorities. When the case finally returned, its seals looked intact, exactly as German and Spanish handlers intended them to appear. Appearances were insufficient. British technicians examined fibers, folds, and tiny security indicators placed to expose invisible interference inside envelopes. The evidence showed that the letters had been removed and replaced, despite careful preservation of every official seal around them. One coded message carried the verdict London needed. The enemy had swallowed the deception completely, including its most sensitive implications. Relief remained guarded, because opening the envelope proved access, not necessarily belief or action at the highest command levels. Intercepted German communications soon supplied the next layer, showing that the contents were circulating beyond local agents in Spain. The copies reached German military intelligence and entered assessments already crowded with reports pointing toward several possible Allied objectives. Analysts judged the material genuine, while British monitoring indicated that its claims were influencing operational warnings and defensive priorities. The strongest confirmation came when German signals repeated the false destinations in instructions meant for commanders across the Mediterranean. Martin had passed from invention into enemy planning, but the scale of his influence still depended upon decisions above intelligence staffs. Hitler's attention gave the deception its strategic force, because his directives could move units far beyond what analysts merely recommended. He ordered precautions for Greece and reinforced concern for Sardinia, treating the captured correspondence as evidence demanding practical response. German commanders could not neglect Sicily entirely, yet every aircraft, division, or patrol assigned elsewhere reduced available flexibility there. The deception worked through allocation, not disappearance. Sicily would still be defended, but it would not receive every possible reinforcement. This distinction matters because later retellings sometimes transformed mincemeat into a spell that emptied the island before invasion entirely. In reality, German and Italian forces remained present, coastal defenses remained dangerous, and Allied troops still faced a contested landing. Mincemeat altered the enemy's distribution of attention and strength, improving odds without removing weather, resistance, or operational error ashore. Its success also depended upon other deceptions, existing German fears, and the broader Allied advantage accumulating around North Africa. By June, British planners could reasonably conclude that Major Martin's false journey had produced genuine strategic movement across the Mediterranean. Now the test moved from intercepted messages to beaches, where Operation Husky would reveal what German belief had actually purchased. By early July, German orders had strengthened distant concerns, but Sicily still held substantial Italian and German formations awaiting invasion. Axis commanders faced a Mediterranean puzzle: defend every plausible coast with limited mobile reserves, aircraft, shipping, and fuel available. False warnings toward Greece and Sardinia forced them to divide attention across distances no headquarters could quickly erase again. In Greece, defensive preparations expanded while commanders watched Balkan approaches that Martin's papers had made appear urgently threatened that summer. Sardinia likewise absorbed reconnaissance, defensive concern, and forces that otherwise might have remained available for Italy's central approaches nearby. Hitler also kept forces positioned against a possible Balkan attack after Sicily was invaded, extending mincemeat's effect beyond landing day. Yet, deception was only one condition among many. Allied success still required weather, navigation, coordination, supply, and combat ashore. Operation Husky assembled thousands of ships and landing craft, carrying British, Canadian, and American formations toward Sicily's southern shores. Convoys departed North African ports under air cover, their routes concealed until geography made the destination unmistakable to observers. A fierce storm struck the convoys before landing, scattering formations and sharpening every danger deception could never address alone. Wind battered small craft, seasickness exhausted troops, and schedules slipped as navigators searched for assigned approaches in darkness offshore. This complication exposed the operation's limits. Germany could be misdirected, but the Mediterranean itself could not be deceived at all. For Sarif, Husky brought another clandestine assignment, this time guiding the invasion fleet accurately toward the beaches near Gela. The submarine approached the Sicilian coast, carrying a new radar beacon buoy designed for leading destroyers to locate their assigned approach. It had to place the device roughly 1,000 yards offshore, close enough for precision and dangerously near defenders. Destroyers leading landing craft could lock onto the signal, turning an invisible point at sea into navigational certainty before dawn. This was deception's practical opposite. Martin had distorted enemy understanding, while Sarif now clarified Allied movement through darkness offshore. Bill Jewell again brought his submarine toward hostile coast under darkness, but this mission allowed no quiet release and retreat. Sarif had to remain nearby through the first wave, exposing herself while larger vessels followed the beacon toward shore. As dawn approached, fog concealed the coastline but also complicated placement, leaving distance, timing, and identity uncertain around them. A German E-boat appeared through the haze, while Sarif laid the buoy, creating danger without either side possessing clarity. If identified, the submarine's presence could reveal that a major landing route was being marked off Gala before sunrise. Sarif dived quickly, leaving the beacon behind while fog and uncertainty prevented the encounter from exposing Husky's approach fully. The buoy functioned as intended. Leading ships acquired its signal and carried their landing formations toward the correct coast. This small device addressed a problem no strategic deception could solve, putting crowded convoys onto selected beaches at night. Across the invasion zone, however, wind and navigation scattered some units, producing confusion that altered local outcomes unpredictably ashore. Some troops landed away from assigned sectors, yet those errors occasionally placed them where defenders had expected nobody to appear. Airborne operations suffered badly in the weather, with aircraft dispersed and gliders missing intended landing areas across southeastern Sicily. The scattered survivors could not execute every planned objective, but their unexpected presence created uncertainty behind coastal positions instead. On the beaches, Italian units and German formations still resisted, proving Mincemeat had reduced concentration rather than erased defense. Smoke-covered road junctions, abandoned helmets marked hurried withdrawals, and interrupted communications made local commanders struggle to assemble a coherent picture. Offshore ships supported the landings while engineers cleared exits and supply parties pushed fuel, radios, and ammunition inland steadily. Enemy commanders had to decide whether these landings were the main invasion or another layer of Allied misdirection entirely. That doubt mattered because Martin's papers had framed Sicily as a decoy, making accurate evidence temporarily harder to trust. Yet they responded rationally, moving available units toward threatened sectors and contesting roads essential to the Allied advance inland. The Allied lodgment survived its dangerous opening, but survival owed much to naval power, air strength, and ground leadership. Mincemeat's contribution was narrower and still consequential. It shaped where Axis leaders expected danger and retained reserves elsewhere longer. Even after Sicily became undeniable, German concern for Greece did not vanish because the document suggested multiple operations ahead. Thus, the dead courier's influence extended past surprise, encouraging the enemy to interpret a real invasion as incomplete evidence. The landings had opened Sicily, but they had not yet explained what Mincemeat truly changed or what it cost. By mid-July, Allied armies had secured a broad lodgment, proving Sicily was no feint but the campaign's central blow. German commanders reacted skillfully, extracting mobile formations before encirclement, while Italian defensive cohesion weakened under bombardment, shortages, and political strain. The decisive payoff of Mincemeat was therefore not an undefended beach. It was precious time purchased through divided expectation. Because Hitler still feared Greece, reinforcements remained tied there when Sicily's reality should have concentrated every available German reserve. That hesitation could not win Husky alone, but it improved the conditions under which naval, air, and ground power operated. By August 17th, the campaign ended after 38 days, with Allied forces controlling Sicily and Mediterranean routes improved significantly. More than 100,000 Axis troops escaped across the Strait of Messina, preserving experienced formations for Italy's defense. Thus, tactical success was incomplete, but strategic consequences arrived quickly. Mussolini fell, and Italy soon moved toward an armistice. The invasion did not knock Italy instantly from war, and German forces turned the peninsula into another punishing campaign. In London, intercepted orders and battlefield deployments completed the operation's answer. German belief had become measurable allocation, delay, and strategic caution. Yet, no single planted letter caused every Axis decision. Existing fears, Allied demonstrations, and German command habits amplified it. The planners had succeeded because their fiction matched reality's texture and entered conclusions the enemy already considered strategically plausible. Major Martin's identity, meanwhile, survived the war through books, films, and retellings, often completely overshadowing the person beneath it. His name was Glyndwr Michael, a Welshman living precariously in London who died in early 1943. Available records show phosphorus poisoning, while whether its ingestion was deliberate remains disputed and should not become convenient certainty. His family was not asked to lend his body to strategy, and secrecy denied him informed consent at all. At Huelva, his grave eventually carried both identities, Major William Martin and Glyndwr Michael, fiction and fact-sharing stone. This was the operation's most enduring price. A vulnerable man's anonymity became material for a brilliant wartime deception scheme. It would be false to deny the lives potentially spared. Equally false would be treating necessity as moral permission. The paradox now resolves. Germany trusted the dead courier because Britain fabricated not perfection, but the untidy evidence of living. Sicily was opened by fleets and soldiers, yet their path widened because an invented major carried fears Germany already possessed. Subscribe for more cinematic military history. What mattered most in Mincemeat? Meticulous planning, German assumptions, calculated risk, or luck?